So a big welcome to Gary HESELTINE.
Thank you. Thank you. I realise it's late in the day. Is the microphone good level? These lights are extremely bright, so I can't really see you at the back. It's just blackness. Like the lady just said, I've spoken here a couple of times before. That's better. I can now see the back. I'm going to start with a few questions, right, which you don't normally get, but put your hands up if you've never seen me lecture before. Right, please leave. I'm only joking. But yeah, that's I would say the vast majority. So let's do it the other way around. How many people have seen me lecture before? Oh, let's see, that's better than I thought. Well done, you got a star in your book. Second question, I like to gauge my audience as to their knowledge on UFOs. How many people in this room, a personal question without picking you out, how many people in this room think that they have had their own UFO strange experience? Put your hand up. Okay, that's maybe half, third to a half. Final question. Of those people that just put the hand up, how many reported it to the police or to the authorities? Put your hands up. One. Any more than one? Two. Have we got two? Three? Oh, well, one at the back. Well done. But it just shows you, as a quick straw poll, how there is still so much stigma attached to this subject. Does that make sense? Okay, so the vast majority, maybe a third to a half, have had some kind of experience that they think is UFO related, but only one person, perhaps out of 50 hands that went up, actually did anything about it. That tells you still where we are. We're not asking questions during the lecture. There's always one. If you do it again, you're out. I've got my bouncers outside, so don't push it. No, I'm only joking. But seriously, any questions, they come at the end if Andy allows it. This is a 90-minute presentation. We're starting, dare I say it, about 3 minutes late, but let's not worry about 3 minutes. It just puts pressure on me. So I try to do it kind of light-hearted, but it's serious what we're talking about. Right, my lecture today is, are we on the brink of a worldwide UAP disclosure? Which you might think is absolutely crazy, because there's no signs of it in the press whatsoever. Certainly not in the UK. But it's a valid question, and it'll kind of become clear why it's a valid question, because you'll see the evidential nature. Now, what you've got to understand is my background. For those of you that don't know me, I served in the Royal Air Force Police between 1983 and 1989. For 3 of my 6 years, I worked on 2 nuclear bases, guarding tactical nuclear weapons, which is very serious and has correlations to the Rendlesham Forest incident. That's why I got involved, because I had a kind of a unique insight of the US Air Force Security Police guarding tactical nuclear weapons on a weapons storage area. I'd done the same at a UK base, RAF Honington, and also in what was then West Germany, RAF Larbruck, near the Dutch border. So I had a kind of an insight that most people don't have. I knew how the security police guarded nuclear weapons. So that kind of was one of the reasons why I got involved in Rendlesham Forest. The lady just mentioned, my book. I'd been following the subject for a long time, and then in 2017, I was approached to get involved in a documentary called Caper Green, which has just aired almost 8 years after production began. It had its cinema debut in Stowmarket on the 20th of July. Wow, that's not long ago. Almost 8 years in the making. But when I got asked, they said, would you be the lead researcher for it? And I went, oh, I've never been asked that before. I've been involved in lots of TV documentaries over the years with obviously TV companies and whatever, TV documentary filmmakers. But I'd never been asked to be the lead researcher. So one of the things that I thought I'd do is, if I was going to put my name to it, it would have to be really, really accurate. That's not that I was going to lie, but I wanted it to be as thorough as possible. So inadvertently, what it led me to do was do a deep re-dive into the subject that I already thought was, I pretty much knew most of it. So I embarked on what turned out to be a 5-year re-investigation. Now, when I say re-investigation, let me put my investigation credentials on the line. Between 1989 and 2013, an almost 24-year career in the police, followed my Air Force service in the police. So I have like 30 years of collective policing experience. And whilst I did not achieve or want to high rank in the police, my specialism was interviewing. I wanted to be at the sharp end. I was, for the last 19 years of my service of 24 years, I was a detective constable, which is not high rank, but it is the main rank who do all the real donkey work on any major inquiries. Forget what you see on TV where inspectors are in interviews, and chief inspectors are in interview. That is absolute bollocks. There are now a lot of rules that say you can only interview people if you've got specialist qualifications. And what I mean by that, I became an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses. So you trained specifically murder, manslaughter, rape. That's what I became, and that was my specialism. I loved the interaction with people, psychologically. So I didn't want to go higher, I wanted to be at the sharp end. Okay, so that was my real interest, is I like trying to retrieve information from witnesses, but also I study the mind of the criminal to try to elicit information that solves crimes or get admissions and things like that. So that kind of is where I come from, 30 years of policing experience. So I can only ever look at the UFO subject through evidential eyes. Now, a lot of the people in this room, and it's no disrespect to the other speakers, but they're not as evidential as me, or they come at this various subjects slightly different to me. I'm not a spiritual person per se. I'm not religious per se at all. However, I do accept now, over the many years that I've been in public research, which is now 23 years in the public domain, that in a sense, it sounds corny, but I feel compelled to do what I do, as if somebody has chosen me. And that sounds kind of weird. But I've spoken to lots of other researchers and they feel the same. It's like somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, right, you've now got to do this. Bear in mind, I had a childhood sighting at the age of 16, but I did not become an active public researcher until I was 42. And I'm now 65. So there's a bit of a gap there, you know, so it's as if a series of things happen in your life, and at some point they say, right, it's time for you to stand up. And I kind of accept now the synchronicities of life. Synchronicity was not a word I'd ever heard of until I got involved in public UFO research. And what that means is it's more than a coincidence. Well, at first, when you're new to it, you think, well, it's just a coincidence. But there were so many bizarre things that happened that, like billions to one, millions to one chance of happening, some of which I may relate if we get time, that over time I've come to realize that it's kind of fate. And I don't know what's going to happen to me in the future and whatever, but I'm just playing a part, like lots of other people are called to do different parts. Whether you call that religion, spirituality, I don't know. I guess it is in a form that there is some kind of guiding hand, but certainly I'm not religious by any standard. But I do believe in fate now, and I basically just think I'm here to do something. We'll see where we go with that. But I look at this subject very evidentially, which maybe sounds a bit of a contradiction there, but it's not. Because when I go back to my lecture now, you're going to be seeing the evidential side. Yeah, so when I talk about UFOs, I talk about it from an evidential perspective. Well, what's evidence? Well, evidence for all criminal cases in the Western world is based on only 3 things. Just the same for anything. Witness testimony, somebody sees something, hears something with their senses. It's still where any one of the senses can be a part of an experience. Those experiences then become written down. Yeah, so when you go to court, if anybody's ever been to court, given a statement for the police, Do you write your statement? No, you don't, because the police write it in the way it is for court. Because you don't know the procedure. They do. They know how the courts work and how they like to have a statement written. So you tell the police officer, and then he writes it down, and he says, are you happy with that? Do you want to make any changes? Blah, blah, blah. You don't write it because you don't know how the system, how the legal system works. So oral testimony becomes written testimony. Anything that's written on a piece of paper is what's called documentary evidence. So anything written. So if you think in simple terms like a fraud case, what we're looking at, bank transaction printouts, receipts, anything that is on a document is what's called documentary evidence. Not documentary as in making a documentary, totally different. And finally, you have what's called real evidence. But it's actually called it's called real evidence, but that doesn't give it the right connotation. What it means is anything physical. So if I use a car to ram the crowd on the high street outside and kill people like you see a lot of people doing now in terrorist acts around the world, that car then becomes an exhibit that you can pin a little label on and say, the red Ford Fiesta was used to mow down people. It's anything physical. So if I, for example, use this, just a clicker, and go over to this lady here, who I've never met before. But if I went to a boom, boom, boom in her eye, and you all saw me, you all become witnesses. You'd all end up giving statements into written, and you'd have a poor eye or no eye at all. But that would become a physical piece of evidence. He used a clicker to gouge the eye out of this lady. You didn't think you were coming to a gory lecture, did you? But do you see what I mean? That's something physical that you can hold up in your hand and say, this is the weapon that was used to gouge your eye out. Thank you. You've got your eye back. Okay, but do you see what I mean? And on those three things, they're the entire legal basis of all criminal investigations, civilian investigations, for the civil court, for the Crown Court, Magistrates Court. They're all based on just those three things. And in reality, if you've had a UFO experience or any kind of strange experience and you reported it, what should happen is that you'll tell them orally what happened. Somebody will then write it down, a potential statement, rarely happens. And if you took photographs of a UFO hovering over your garden, and you've took video, like a lot of people now have smartphones, good quality, then in theory, if the police were bothered enough, they could get that downloaded and they could say, this footage is exhibit GH1, the lady with a gouged eye who's having a bad experience today, it's not her day, took a UFO above a garden while she could still see with one eye. But you see what I mean? There's no difference between any UFO experience in terms of evidence. It creates witnesses, creates a potential evidence trail, all of which can be documented, and produces physical evidence. Okay, so not to cut a long story short, I've only brought 9 books with me. I'm not going to stall anywhere. I brought 9 just in case anybody wanted to see me at the end if you do. Okay, so I retired early after 24 years in the police in 2013 because by then I felt compelled to quit the police, which is a bit risky with your pension and all that. But with my Air Force service, I had 27 years in the pension fund, so 27 years of what is regarded as a 30-year pension. So I had a fair amount in, and I took that risk of quitting to launch my own online magazine, which is this magazine, UFO Truth Magazine. That's 4 front covers, and it's totally dedicated to UFOs. 96 pages, bi-monthly, it's not in print. It's too expensive to print anything. I don't know how Marcus and Duncan Rhodes gets away with it, but the print costs are ridiculous. So you'll find that there is no real printed UFO magazine anywhere in Europe, really. There's 1 or 2, but very few, because of the print costs. All right? It's not in print, so it's a PDF. But it's a glossy magazine in a PDF format, and it comes to your email every 2 months, bi-monthly. But it features many of the best researchers and writers in the world on this subject, most of whom I've met. Because I've now spoken in over 23 countries, and I'm very lucky. But for me, it's a passion. Something drives me to do this. Okay, so if you want to speak to me about at the end, sign up, whatever, do so at the end. It's not here as a sales ploy. But you need to know my background, because if I'm going to talk to you about evidential things, you must have some level of faith, I guess, wrong word, but interest that I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, so hopefully by now you've seen that with a lady's gouged eye that I know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I know what evidence is and what would stand up in a court of law, a hypothetical court of law. And if we ever did get to a hypothetical court of law and ask the question of, to a jury, if we did it for real, and we examined the best evidence of UFOs over the last 80 years, I have absolutely no doubt that a jury would convict 12-0, that there was a huge body of evidence in the best case scenario, the best evidence. General rule of UFOs, 97% of everything ever reported as a UFO turns out to have a mundane explanation. Astronomical, mistake, anything turns out it's a mistake. So what you end up usually is with a 5%. So the 100% becomes usually left with a 5% residue. And then when you dig down, so when I get involved, and other researchers get involved, we examine the 5%. The 5%, we can still throw out probably another 2%, just through investigation. But you're always left with this small margin of about 3%. This is on a general consensus across the board, worldwide, history-wise. Yeah? So there's a 3% element that defies explanation after investigation. Well, as I've said many times at lectures, I'm not interested in the 97% that can be explained. I'm only interested in the 3%, because that's the good bit. Yeah? Now, unfortunately, when TV approaches it, they never go to the 3%, they go to the 100%. And there's, you know, I'm not a big fan of the mainstream media for lots of reasons, whether it be political or whatever. But for you to be here, there's a round of applause in there somewhere, because if you're attending conferences, you have partly had the veil of knowledge lifted above your eyes. The veil that covers you from what is regarded as the norm. So you've seen something, or you feel attuned enough to have an interest to go out your way to come to conferences. That means that you've got an open mind, which is key to any kind of future interest. Yeah? So the fact that you're here is good. It means you've partially lifted that veil and see that perhaps the media doesn't report things quite as they should, that there is always spin. They don't necessarily overtly lie, the media. They just don't give you all the information. And on the UFO subject in particular, that's really relevant, because they cherry pick what they put in the documentaries on any aspect of the UFO topic. They don't give you all the information. They don't lie per se. They just give you bits of the information, a bit of good stuff, a bit of funny stuff, make you doubt the good stuff. All right? So that's my perspective. I'm only interested in the evidential 3% that stands up to scrutiny after investigation. Yeah? So, when we come back to the topic of are we on the brink of disclosure, I'm not going to do it really from the perspective of the impact to the world, if it happens, that psychological impact, which is probably where other people in this audience and speakers would do. Mine's to say, are there actually real, is there any real evidence to say that we are approaching some kind of breakthrough moment, even though it doesn't seem remotely possible in this country? Not even remotely possible. But we are. And this is why my lecture will spell out the evidential reasons as to why we are approaching some kind of major moment. Yeah, we can't keep going on as we are. And in many ways, at this moment in time in world history, with the very uncertain world that we're in, I think it's the elephant in the room. it's the one big topic that's yet to surface because it's not deemed by 95% of the world to be a big topic. Because you don't know anything about the big topic because nobody tells you about it. That's how you get deceived by the media. But there are things going on that you're probably not aware of. Okay. So I'm not going to run a big thing about the history of the subject. That's for you to go and explore. And I'm here for 90 minutes, so I want to kind of guide you through the key parts that I think are interesting. But there have been some seminal moments. Whilst UFOs really go back to the Second World War, and not just balls of light that were called Foo Fighters, there were structured craft reported by Lancaster bomber crews in 1942 and 1944 with a crew of 12 seeing huge dish-shaped objects, cylindrical shaped objects, metallic, seen for minutes at a time. They're in the archives at Kew, the National Records. But we really talk about the modern era when we talk about two seminal cases from 1947. Obviously Roswell, most of you have heard of that. And then the Kenneth Arnold sighting, which predated it by a couple of weeks. Private pilot flying over Washington State, and he saw 9 objects that were like in a line, strange shape, crescent shape, doing that, fluttering across the sky. He knew the differences between, the distances between 2 peaks of mountains, because he was a businessman and he flew that route all the time. He knew the exact distance between 2 points, and he measured as the first object went in, past the peak, and then he measured it to the second peak when it went by. So then he could calculate the speed, which is about 1,400 miles an hour in 1947. Well, the top plane of the time would be 300, 400 miles max. The early jets, 500 max, ME-262. The first operational jet, maybe 400 to 500 miles an hour. So this was something much more rapid. They're the seminal cases that, in a sense, launched what's called the modern era of ufology. But we have other cases that you're probably not aware of. I mean, there's a Kenneth Arnold, the top one, that's the crescent-shaped object. And then we look at this is the famous press conference with Roswell, where the guy holding up the bit of silver foil was told minutes earlier, before that photograph was taken, this is what we recovered. And he went, that's not what we recovered. This is what we recovered to the press. Okay. You don't have a choice. If you're in the military, you're not going to say otherwise you're kicked out, lose your pension, you lose your home because you've no job, you lose all that money that you've put in. There's pressure on you. You don't rock the boat if you're in the military or in government to a certain degree. Okay, how many people, stick your hands up if you've heard of the Clarice case in Brazil, 1977. 1, 2, I know you, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4 of the 6 people who put their hands up are actually involved in ufology, so that's a bit of a cheat. So basically 2. All right? The Clarice case is one of the best cases in the world. Why? Because it's a case that involved multiple attacks, and I'm not using the word lightly. Numerous, multiple physical attacks of beams being directed from UFOs into buildings, huts, coming through, striking the people, drawing blood. Akin to a lesbian. Sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But this was well documented. 1 or 2 people died. It went on for so long that the local people really got onto the mayor and said, you must do something about this, we need help. The local villages are being attacked. This went on for months. And so eventually, an army team was brought in, and they ended up doing a 4-month investigation in that region, and they collected and collated literally hundreds of UFO reports, a lot of which the paperwork has been released. But here's the thing. They say that they took over 16 hours of cine film of UFOs of all different shapes, physical. This is 1977. Some of the drawings that you see there, you can see very physical. That's one of the ladies who's still alive who was attacked. And they called it the chupa chupa, suk suk, because the beams would come through, hit them, like in a triangular pattern of light, and then draw the blood, which would make them very ill. I suspect through some form of radiation aspect. Okay? But it's a very famous case, and there was a very famous researcher called A.J. Javard, who sadly passed away recently, last few years, who was a good friend of mine, the guy on the right in the bottom photograph. And he interviewed the guy on the left there with the glasses, in red, who happened to be the colonel that actually went public about this incredible case that nobody ever talks about, because most people aren't even aware of it, unless you're really into UFOs. But it's one of the best cases in the world, and people talk about, oh, are they a threat? Well, something was a threat. Yeah? This is well documented. 1 or 2 people died. It's a very, very important case. And people would be probably horrified if they knew the full details of it. But that 16 hours of footage has never been released. There's a handful of photographs been released, just lights in the sky, but all the good stuff has never been released by the Brazilian authorities. Maybe 1,000 pages of written documents have been produced, but you want to see the video, don't you? That's what we want to see, good stuff, and they don't release it. Okay. Now, I'm going to play a little trailer now for 3 minutes. This is the trailer that I was involved in Capel Green for the first 3 years. This is a documentary about the Rendlesham Forest Incidents, because there's multiple. Hence why my book is called The Rendlesham Forest UFO Incidents. It's not one event. In my book, I conclude that there were 17 different timed UFO events over about a week-long period, not 2 or 3 days, as was led to believe for a long, long time. Okay, but this is a really good trailer, so let's see if it'll play. Might want to just put those lines out.
He's coming toward us now. Now I'm observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
It was like a thick beam that was scanning the whole WSA, like it was looking for something.
Just off the fabric of this machine thing came this bluish gold bubble, and it's split into 3. And inside that, the upper extremities of what I only can say was a non-human entity.
When it broke into 3 pieces, the whole thing just blew us away. I mean, there's no aircraft that could do that, and no aircraft can even do that today.
I was scared to death. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know if it was going to hurt me.
And these guys removed the radar tapes and the bridge logs of those events.
A civilian employee in the Air Force headquarters at the Pentagon said that there were photographs taken. This document has never been shown in any sort of television program or documentary.
In these locations that witnesses have told me to go and look at, I found elevated radiation.
There's something here.
These lights, and quite clearly structured craft, other types of high strangeness, something that is age old.
I saw an object, I pointed it out to my son, he saw it too, and it was not something that I can explain.
We're literally just coming up to it right now. Aliens are here, and we're stood over there.
Something flew into the frame. Boom. And as it flew along, it fired a beam of light at our dummy warhead.
We have actual motion picture film of the UFO. What told me this was alive is that when they moved.
But I had other experiences going on over there in that East Gate area too. If you want me to expand, I will.
This is the only film interview I'm going to do for anybody.
Right, that's all one case, the Rendlesham Forest incident, which is, as you can see, with all the very good graphics, that it's multiple events. Now, the reality is that I was asked to become the lead researcher. I was the lead researcher for 3 years. And then I basically ended up leaving the project in 2020 during what was lockdown, because by then we'd had over 60 hours of material, and I thought, you know, we've got more than enough to do a 2-hour documentary. The editor, in his wisdom, disagreed with me. And I said, well, I've given you kind of like 3 years, and I was only signed up for 18 months. Now, I'd done all the interviews, and they've subsequently done a lot of re-interviews, but most of those people on there, I did the interviews initially, right? And we had those 5 years ago. So for my mind, it was, I can't sit on valuable witness testimony indefinitely. It just seems wrong. It's like if you knew the identity of a murderer, would you just keep hanging on to it and not disclose it? So eventually I said, I'm walking away. And hence why at that point, I'd never contemplated writing the book. But eventually I thought, well, I've got so much material that I found in a reinvestigation that took 5 years, 3 years to write the book, that there was so much material that would never have gone into the documentary anyway, simply because of time. But I'd re-interviewed witnesses. I'd used some of my advanced interviewing skills to try to elicit more information, new sightings, which I did do to a degree. It worked. It's not designed to do that, but it worked in a couple of cases. And I got brand new cases that nobody had ever heard of. Ending up, like I say, with the conclusions that there were 17 different time events, and it's not 3 days, it's at least over a week period. Okay, so it's numerous incidents, 17 different time events. So you can see that this is not a one-off event. This is a series of events. Yeah? Hence why it's one of the world's best cases. Many people say it's even better than the Roswell case. That's up for debate, but it's one of the most, it's definitely in the top 10 of the best in history. And it's British, so we should be proud of that in that sense. What was that? Did I miss something there? I didn't think I told a joke there. Right, okay, so how many people, stick your hands up if you're aware of the Nimitz case, 2004. Oh, actually not many. Well, again, unless you're into this subject, you wouldn't be aware. But the Nimitz case is turning out to be one of the very best cases in the world because there's lots of evidence behind it. Suffice to say, the top photograph there is USS Nimitz, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, US. And when you have a carrier, you usually get a lot of destroyers and smaller ships around it, like battle fleet. They don't just come with one. They usually have maybe 8 to 12 other ships around them as like an escort. Well, during some military exercises off the West Coast, numerous objects were seen on radar for 2 weeks before something physical was caught on video. All right? And just to put things in perspective, they were tracked for two weeks prior, and there was a radar specialist, in simplistic terms, called Kevin Day, who's subsequently gone on the record. And he was tracking objects that were moving from 80,000 feet in the air, coming down, straight down, as in vertical, and stopping 50 feet above the water on a dime. And 80,000 feet was traversed in how long do you think? I'm going to ask the lady with the gouged eye. With your good eye, how long do you think it took to come down from 80,000 feet to 500 feet? In terms of minutes and seconds, have a guess. 10 minutes, 0.8 of 1 second. 0.8 of 1 second. From 80,000 feet, stop on a dime. Inertia would have destroyed any human inside. So this is physical evidence that was tracked for 2 weeks. And then eventually, during one of the exercises, he basically says, we need to do something about it. Send some aircraft up. So cutting a long story short, two aircraft went up, and one of them eventually got a video clip called the Tic Tac video, if you've ever seen it. It's online, called Tic Tac. It actually is one of 3 videos that I'll end up talking about. All authenticated US Navy video. All right, so this is not you took it, I took it, Joe Nobody. These are US F-18 Hornet pilots. Yeah? And they were recording it. And what the Tic Tac was a 40-foot, it was called the Tic Tac because the guy who became really prominent and the first pilot to really talk about it was called Commander David PRUFOS. Now, this wasn't any pilot. This was Tom Cruise. Yeah, no, seriously. He was a Top Gun instructor, flown over 80 aircraft. If he didn't know it was in the sky, nobody did. And he said he saw this object just ping-ponging, doing this, angular movements, which you defy our laws of physics and aerial maneuverability. And he said it was like a ping-pong ball. And he says, and then it just shot off in a blink of an eye. But prior to that, he was up there, and it was down there just above the surface of the water, and he's trying to come down at it to get a closer view. It then starts to mimic him. It comes up as he's coming down. And then at the last minute, it goes. Now, here's the weird thing. In aircraft terms, they have what's called waypoints. Yeah? And they'd said that as part of the exercise, he was then to move 60 miles away where his next point he should be for the exercise. And when it disappeared, he was then told, and this is all a matter of record, the object's waiting for you at the waypoint. About 3 seconds later, 60 mile, waited. How would it know that he was going to that point? Unless it tapped into his thoughts, or it was able to read his instruments, or listen in, surveil his cockpit. Bizarre, but that's what happened. So this has become a very, very famous case. So I'm just pointing out 1 or 2 cases that you may not be familiar with that have got loads of physical evidence. Lots of military people have gone on the records now, videos of the object, radar tracks and things like that. So the Tic Tac was described by Commander David PRUFOS as a Tic Tac, as in a sweet, that shape, rounded edges, white. Only trouble is it was 40 feet long. But it had no engines. It had apparently had a couple of little protrusions underneath. But tiny little protrusions, but we don't know what they are. But it was seen, and it was doing these ping-pong maneuvers, which we can't do. That guy eventually spoke, and you'll see a photograph of him later on, at a congressional hearing, saying exactly what I've just told you. So now, in 2013, the year I retired, and literally at the same time I retired, I was asked to go to America to speak at what was called the Citizens' Hearings. And this was in Washington, D.C. It was held at what's called the National Press Club, the most important venue by the White House in the United States for announcements. Okay, it's the, as we would say, the dog's bollocks, you know. There's no children here, I hope. But literally, it's where all presidents from around the world had spoken. And guess what? I was asked to be one of 40 witnesses who spoke there. Little guy from Scunthorpe. What am I doing there? But I'm talking about my police officer research. That's how I'd become known within the subject. And so I was invited there to talk about my police officer research and the unofficial national database that I created in 2002. That's what made me known within the subject. And this is a little clip where I do a little speech then.
To back up Linda there, I think we have to put things in perspective, and it goes back to addressing the question, your last question. Realistically, every UFO researcher in the world will say of 100% of cases, 95% of them turn out to have a mundane explanation. That's a generally accepted figure worldwide. Have a mundane, whether it be astronomical, misinterpretation, that's a generally accepted figure. But really, where we start to delve down is when we look at the 5%. Well, when you look at the 5% after investigation, you end up with probably about 3% of hardcore cases. Now, these are hardcore cases after investigation. Well, I aren't bothered about the 97%, and your remit here is not really to speculate, in my opinion, as to where and what they're doing. It's really to establish the facts. And the facts are very, very apparent from very credible people that we are demonstrating that this is a subject that needs to be addressed as on an evidential basis. And it's not for us to speculate really where they're coming from, what their agenda is. It's really to look at the evidence. This is a hearing to look at evidence, and this is what we should be doing. And the evidence in that 3% is what counts. And the media really need to look at the 3%, the cases that defy all explanation after investigation. That's what evidence is. Is there evidence that would stand up in a court of law? Yes, there is. If there was a plane crash scenario just outside this building and we all happened to be on a coffee break, we'd all be material witnesses to it. However, when we talk about UFOs, the media suddenly make us all crazy. And that is wrong, and this needs to be addressed. And the panel in front of me are the representatives that can help make that happen. We are relying on you to use your voice and experience to listen to the evidence. And that's all any UFO investigator wants. All we want is a level playing field. That is not a lot to ask in the world. We just want to present evidence.
But sir, are you
Yeah, let me talk. Who was addressing there was a former congresswoman. The panel was one former senator who actually was a presidential candidate at one time, and 5 recently retired congressmen and women. So it was a panel of 6. And it was done as a mock congressional hearing. Bear in mind, the last genuine UFO congressional hearing had not taken place since 1968. So this is 2013. So it ran for a week, Monday to Friday, 40 witnesses. Many were first-hand pilots. Some were UFO researchers of international renown. And basically, there were 40 witnesses over that 5-day period. And I was very honoured and privileged to be there. And that was just part of the speech where I said, you know, I can only look at this subject as evidence, through evidential eyes. You know, let's look at the best evidence. Okay, now, there's a seminal moment that begins this trail to, are we on the brink of disclosure? Maybe. And it begins really in 2017 with a New York Times article that basically disclosed for the first time that there'd been a hidden US research program that was called ATIP, under this guy, headed by this guy, Luis Elizondo, who's now become very famous in the UFO field. Arguably the most famous face that you've seen over the last 8 years, because he headed that ATIP program, Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. Not easy to say. But he did, and I've met him, and at the same time, or within a few months, 3 US Navy authenticated videos came out. They were called the Tic Tac, the Gimbal, and the Go Fast, all of which were taken by bona fide military pilots and authenticated by the US Navy and government that they were real, they were genuine, and that they were genuine unknowns. And to this day, they aren't explained. 1 or 2 people will try to say that the Tic Tac has been explained. It hasn't. When you look at the real best evidence, it hasn't. But people try to claim things. Okay? This is when scientists who for a long time may have had a private interest in UFOs, thinking, oh, that's curious, I'd like to get involved in research, but didn't, because if they did, they'd lose the funding. It was a subject that you couldn't go near. Nobody really wanted you to go down that line, and it was really a dangerous thing to try to do. And very few scientists actually came forward and got involved in research because they feared losing their funding, their pensions, blah, blah, blah. So the vast majority didn't. But that video, the Tic Tac video, frame by frame, made many scientists who would never actively go public to become public and say, this has changed things. How many of you heard of a very famous scientist called Michio Kaku? Put your hand up if you've heard of him. A few, but not many. He's like one of these showbiz kind of personalities, but a scientist. And he used to be very skeptical of UFOs. But when he saw the tic-tac and examined it, he said, I've gone through it frame by frame. It defies our laws of physics. And he said, now the ownership is on those that say it's not, to prove that it's not of unknown origin. So he did a complete flip. So that shows you how good it was. All right. This is what's called the gimbal. And it turns in midair. These are just little short clips. But the fact that it turns, it was like saucer shaped and it turns on the air. These are forward-looking infrared radar. So they're not seen in the visible spectrum. And the guy earlier this morning, he was saying things they're not seen in the visible spectrum. All right? So these were seen on forward-looking infrared FLIR cameras. Hence the colour and the way they're darkened. But basically, when that object rotates, it does something that you can't do. Because as soon as you turn, so if you're flying a plane, and you've got two wings either side, you like that, and then you do that, you lose lift, and you drop from the sky. This didn't. It turned in the sky, and you can hear on better clips where it says, it's rotating, as if to say, how can it do that? You can hear the excitement of the commentator. Right. How many of you are aware that there's a lot of drone incursions in the US and recently over the UK in the last 2 years? Oh, a few. Oh. How many think that all of them are just drones? Put your hands up if you think they're just man-made drones. Oh, that's interesting. Because I agree. Whilst the majority will be, there is a real story behind the drone issue that is an elephant in the room. Many are seen to be anomalous. Now, when we think of drones, I immediately think of Ukraine, Russia. You see the clips following tanks, boom, dropping little bombs on top. Absolutely terrifying. I'd hate to be in a drone warfare, conventional drone warfare scenario, because basically if it spots you, you're dead. You can't get away. And that's the world that we're moving into. But in a sense, it's conventional movement, bombs attached to cheap drones. Yeah, that have been weaponized. The drones that we're talking about that are seen over military installations, Arif Lakenheath, Arif Faltwell, last year, and also hugely over several states of the US in what was latterly part of 2024, so not long ago. And it began really, and still had the attention in New Jersey, was where it really began. The drones that they were seeing, and people were reporting and filming, some of which were definitely anomalous. And why they're anomalous is because, to this day, many officials have said, we don't know where they come from. Literally, they just appear near the base. So they've not been tracked. They can't be tracked. They suddenly appear. They fly over the base unimpeded for hours on end, 3-4 hours. Multiple objects over sensitive military airspace and military installations. And then they disappear. Nobody knows where to go to. They're not on radar. So you've got something that comes from nowhere and you don't know where it's coming from. It's there over the target, as it were, the military base, for hours on end, unimpeded, and then suddenly disappears. And nobody knew where it went to. And loads of officials, and not just law enforcement, mayors, councillors, senior senior agency figures, like National Security, FBI. Lots of officials have said, to this day, we don't know what they are. But according to President Trump, which is an irony here, because he was supposed to be really transparent for UFOs, he then came out and said, no, they're all authorized. That's bullshit, that's a lie. An out-and-out lie. Many government officials have gone on the record and have said they were truly anomalous. So it's the elephant in the room, because nobody talks about these, and they're trying to quiet it down. But let's go to an incident where drones are actively involved. There's an incident, there's been lots of these incidents, where ships in the middle of the sea are suddenly swarmed, is not an exaggeration, swarmed by multiple objects going around the ship. Now, you can imagine one of the excuses with the drones over land-based sightings was people would say, well, why don't you shoot them down? If they're anomalous, why don't you shoot them down? And the Americans came out and said, well, we can't do that because the debris that may fall may hit the public and cause death and injury. Fair enough. But why, when you're over the sea, unless you've got a few friends with some fish, why aren't they being blown out of the sky? Especially if you think about it in conventional terms. Let's say this is Chinese or Russian. What would we normally do? Let's substitute drone for Russian MiG fighter invading America's airspace. What would we do? You'd parallel it, you'd chaperone it, and you'd say, get out of our airspace, or else we're going to blow you out of the sky. Wouldn't we? You hear it on the news. Oh, yes, there's like big bombers called Bear aircraft, Russian big Bear, big old propeller-driven planes. Sometimes they're surveillance planes, and they're full of high-tech equipment, and they'll fly alongside the border of the UK, and they'll say, 2 F-16s were sent up to intercept, and we shattered it and said, get away, or else we'll destroy you. That ends up on the 6 o'clock news. But these don't end up on the 6 o'clock news. Why? Because they don't even fire at them over the sea. If you genuinely thought that these were Russian or Chinese, they're adversary. Wow, they're spying on you. For hours at a time, these events have lasted. Often days, often seen repeatedly during exercises. Would you not try to shoot them down, try to garner that technology? These are not conventional drones. And why are they not firing on them? Because they know, in reality, that they're not. And maybe they're worried that if they did fire at them, they might fire back. And my gun's bigger than your gun. And if something was of intelligent, unknown origin that may potentially be from elsewhere, interdimensional, extraterrestrial, maybe they're a lot more advanced than us. And maybe they have weapons that could say, you know, that ship of yours, it's gone. So that's maybe why they don't shoot. So all they do is they send out what's called Snoopy teams. Not Snoop Dogg, Snoopy teams. Snoopy teams are camera teams, camera specialists. Let's gather the evidence. Let's go. There's the drone. Bit of video. They gather intelligence that must go somewhere. Let's feed it into the Pentagon. Feed it into somebody to study. But if it really was a genuine adversary, we'd be blowing it out of the sky. And the fact that we don't means it's an unknown, without a shadow of a doubt. It's an unknown, and it's not an isolated case. So does that make sense? Yeah? Doesn't make sense. Okay, now let's start moving evidentially to why I think that we're approaching a moment of some kind. For those of you that don't know, legislation was passed in 2021 in America that said for the first time in American history that the authorities, for want of a better word, the military, were required, and the Pentagon, were required by law, signed by the President, to produce twice yearly classified reports, written reports. Classified means me and you can't see them, but they also were required to do one unclassified report. And they did release an unclassified report that basically said, I think there were 144 cases over the recent years, of which they only had explained one. So 143, as they described, anomalous cases. You weren't really given much details. You weren't even given a précis about the events, but you were told there are 144, only one of which would have been explained. We now know since then there's been about 800 reports, but they don't give you the details. They don't even give you a précis date, time, where. This is how sensitive this is. But this legislation was passed, and it was the first time something evidentially forced the intelligence services to produce a report. Now, do you think that the intelligence agencies wanted that to happen? No, we don't want to give you our best stuff. They really didn't. They're kicking and screaming, and to this day, there's a real debate and fight going on to establish this evidence that they are required and mandated to do. But nevertheless, this was an important key step, 2021. Legislation passed, signed by the President. Again, there was what's called the Gillibrand Amendment. That's the lady there, she's a senator, Senator Gillibrand, signed into law. And it required by law. So fundamentally, evidentially, it put them on a pedestal. You have to supply some, if not all, information to the government, basically, so to get in control of it. But they haven't, and they've played hardball. The US Air Force deny that they've had anything to do with UFOs, even though it's demonstrably a lie. Okay? But the US Navy are saying we've had all hundreds of cases. But the US Air Force, who was traditionally involved in UFO research for decades, are now saying, oh, we ain't got any. And it's a bit like that. It's as overt as that the US Air Force is not playing ball to this mandate. 2021, just a couple of quotes that came out in that year. John Brennan, the top right corner, I'll read it out to you, because I didn't know it word for word. CIA Director. But I think some of the phenomena we're going to be seeing continues to be unexplained and might, in fact, be some kind of phenomenon that is the result of something that we don't yet understand, and that could involve some kind of activity that some might say constitutes a different form of life. Now, if you've never thought of alien in that word, then that's what he's saying. That there's a different form of life, intelligent life, whether it's interdimensional, ultra-terrestrial, whatever. But he's saying that we're dealing with something that's not human. And this one at the bottom, and he's now in the government now, in very high role. There are a lot more sightings than ever been made to the public. John Ratcliffe, former Director of National Intelligence. Well, if he doesn't know, we should all go on. So it's an important quote. Then something really important happened. We had our first congressional hearing in Congress, making it a congressional hearing, since 1968. And it was shite. In reality, it was shite. We all waited. And they put up 2 Pentagon officials who supposedly took you through a public briefing on UFOs. But they quickly revealed that they weren't telling you all the information. They didn't know a lot of things, because afterwards, when they'd done their spiel, a lot of senators started asking them questions, and they didn't know stuff that all of us know, that have gone on the record, like UFOs being seen for the last 8 years near nuclear facilities. Big correlation between nuclear weapons and UFOs all around the world. Nuclear power plants, nuclear ships, weapon storage areas. They didn't know about that. Oh, no, I don't think I've ever heard of them. They were lying out the teeth. But they were Pentagon officials. So it was not worth the paper it was written on. The only thing that was important was it was a congressional hearing that put them on the stand. They took an oath, lied, in my opinion, or were, shall we say, clever with the truth. Yeah? So that was a waste of time, but it was strategically important, because this is 2022, not long ago. And it's putting a bit more visibility on steps to elicit, hopefully, the truth at some point. Now, this is just a little brief video clip. What was set up originally when it was mandated that the intelligence agencies had to abide by this legislation passed in 2021 was initially they set up what was called the UAP task force. UAP was the push word to replace UFO, because UFO had too many connotations to alien, which it did, but I still like the word. I still think it's a sexy word, and UAP means nothing to most people. But most people, as soon as you said a UFO, wow, or flying saucer, wow, you know exactly what you're talking about. You say that to UAP and they go, huh? Unless you're interested in this subject. So I think that was done deliberately, but they also introduced it, and I guess I go with it, because they were doing it on the basis of air safety. That's how modern ufologists and people in government who were friendly to the subject wanted to frame it and say, look, we do need to have a discussion, but how can we get it and take this stigma away? And they had to get rid of UFO, replace it with a more generic. And originally it was unidentified aerial phenomena, and then it became anomalous phenomena. Yeah, so it changed by them. And that then allowed you to talk about it without being stigmatized in quite the same way. Yeah? We weren't talking about little green men, which was the connotation to UFO, or flying saucer. They then changed the UAP task force into what was called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, ARO. It should have been arsehole, but it's ARO. Because again, it was Pentagon, and it's a lie. We've subsequently seen over the last 2 or 3 years that they aren't being genuine. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But this is a little clip that they put out when the head of ARO, Sean Kirkpatrick, then head of ARO, he's not the head anymore, and he talked about spheres. Spheres has been the most common UFO reported on their records and investigation. And spheres of all manner of sizes, from a small beach ball size object to the size of a car to something bigger. And look for the, if you've not seen this, this is over, I think, Afghanistan. And it shows a clip, a military clip, so taken by a military camera, of a silver sphere just flying across the sky. It's a crap clip in terms of the camera quality and being tracked. But you do see a silver sphere, what appears to be a ball, flying through the frame on a couple of occasions. So keep your eyes peeled.
You'll see it come through the top of the screen.
There you go.
It goes, and then
so
the
just
camera
caught on a
will
random
slowly
military, probably satellite.
You'll see it pop in and out.
And it takes its time, and you'll see it on the right-hand side. You'll catch up to it
This
again.
is essentially
right-hand
all
corner,
of the data we have
right-hand corner. There it
with this
is.
event from some years ago.
And he said that 50% of the sightings that they had were spheres. So that's interesting in itself, because it kind of correlated what a lot of people were reporting. And I think spheres are one of the anomalous UFOs that's seen. And he said none of them could really be explained. But he said they were genuinely short in duration, and that's it, we didn't have enough data. And it was supposed to be really scientific, and said we're going to use the best science to try to explain this. The reality is they then put out a report in 2024 as part of a mandated historical review going all the way back to the Second World War, and it was a complete whitewash. We know it's a whitewash because a lot of the people military people who'd given testimony and had said, well, I've given a statement to ARO, this new department, were then trivialized. No, you didn't say, or not even mentioned at all. And these were really famous reports. There is set to be another congressional hearing with unknown as yet listed witnesses. Early date is September 2025. So this is coming. So if you think about it, a good witness one in 23, a not so good witness, but still some key witnesses 2024. We're getting more. So it means that there's something pushing this. Why is it getting into the mainstream? And eventually it will. A colonel called Carnell, a retired colonel, US Air Force, US Army, he came up with a phrase called catastrophic disclosure. And what that means is, if they don't disclose soon, with the race of technology and the developments that we've got, something is going to happen that is so profound, and people are going to record it and live stream it, that they won't be able to contain it, and that will create an ontological shock, whereas there should be it rolled out under a kind of an educated way. That documentary, I am sure, was made with all those high intelligence people to go alongside a public statement from the president or some very high official. Last slide. in the last 3 months. The guy, top right-hand corner, Jay Stratton, he featured in that trailer. Well, they all featured. He said, and that was in that trailer, so it's in public domain, he ran the UAP task force for the Pentagon. If he don't know what he's looking at, we've got something wrong. And he said, I have seen non-human craft and non-human beings. Wow, he's never said anything like that publicly before because of his non-disclosure agreements. Then Eric Davis, May, says he's arguably the second most important research scientist in UAP research, official research. He said during a Congress UAP Disclosure Fund panel discussion in a side room at the Congress, they're typically multiple species people are familiar with. The Greys, the Nordics, people who talked about reptilians and insectoids. It's not that they're reptilian or insectoid, it's that they resemble, or to the precipitate, they look like basically a reptile or an insect type, humanoid, i.e. head, 2 arms, legs, and they have a head and 4 limbs and torso. He's never, ever said anything publicly like that. And then finally, this is arguably the very top guy, Dr. Alputov. He's been working in secret for about 40 years on UAP. If he doesn't know what it is, there is something very badly wrong. And he said this on the Joe Rogan podcast, again in May. He said lots of things, but the key thing is, Joe Rogan asked, how many of these crashed craft, as in probability, do you estimate that human beings have recovered? And his answer was, more than 10. Well, if we had one, it'd be exciting, but if we have more than 10, it's 10 times more exciting. He has never, ever, despite being interviewed hundreds of times, said anything like that. So I think that documentary, The Age of Disclosure, is meant to come out when an announcement is made. Let's see if that new UAP legislation gets through. Intact, the UAP Disclosure Act, and it would appear in what's called the National Defence Authorization Act. It's the NDAA, it's the fiscal big bill that they put forward to get funding. Signed off by the President in December, whoever the President is. If that happens, it sets the platform, if that legislation passes, if we have more congressional hearings with high-quality witnesses, it sets an inevitable, logical progression to say that there is going to be announcements of some kind. And I think it's because they're in a race with China and Russia to weaponize UFO crash materials and weaponize it for America's benefit so that it makes that country the most dominant nation on the earth, which is what America wants to do. And we might actually be lagging behind China, because they work more as a collective, whereas we are very polarized in the West. So they might have got their best scientists together to all work on, like the Manhattan Project, to get the best brains to work out if they can reverse engineer this stuff. Now, because of the secret, compartmentalized secrecy that's been surrounding this subject for 80 years, our top scientists aren't even aware that there's a UAP problem. So by saying a public announcement, they might finally find a way to bring all our top scientists in the West to say, look, we need to work on this quick. We need the top minds quick, else we will not be the dominant nation on the earth. Thank you very much.